Good day, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It's an absolute privilege to welcome you all today to this session on what we consider one of the most pressing issues of our time, the fight against child sexual abuse material, CSAM. I'm honored to share our platform with two thought leaders in this space. The challenge of combating CSAM is monumental, and it continues to evolve with advancing technologies. The growth of online platforms, decentralized content creation, increasingly sophisticated methods of distribution have made it easier for bad actors to exploit vulnerable children and escape detection. The scale is staggering. Each year, millions of images and videos of child sexual abuse material are uploaded and shared across platforms worldwide. And sadly, the numbers continue to grow. As professionals in the risk and compliance industry, we know that our tools, whether they be AI-based detection models, regulatory frameworks, or monitoring protocols, are only part of the solution. It's a challenge that demands the collective strength of all sectors: government, tech companies, law enforcement, and payment organizations like ours that are at the intersection of disruption. The complexity of this problem cannot be overstated. The conversation we're having today is not just about compliance, it's about safeguarding the future of children around the globe. I am incredibly fortunate to introduce two individuals who are on the front lines of the fight. They are not only thought leaders, but advocates who have dedicated their lives to protecting children and ensuring that perpetrators of these heinous acts are found, deplatformed, and when possible, brought to justice. Our host, Erin Brusseau, is a passionate advocate and thought leader who lives and breathes the payments ecosystem in all of its complexities. Most recently, she was tackling the vital international counterfeit ecosystem for Wish. A true thought leader in the fight to disrupt. Welcome to the platform, Erin. I appreciate it. Also joining her today is Guillermo Galarza Abizaid, is the Vice President, Partnership and Law Enforcement Training at the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And I'm going to break the rules and read directly from his bio. For the past 27 years, Guillermo has managed international law enforcement training to investigate online child sexual exploitation. The training initiatives provide law enforcement, justice officials, and other experts around the world tools and techniques needed to investigate online child sexual exploitation. To date, more than 350,000 experts have attended courses around the world and have attended courses online made available through ICMEC and Guillermo's work. Both of you, your work is inspiring. I'm eager to hear your insights on where you stand today and what more we can do to be part of the solution.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for that intro. Gigi, thank you so much for joining today to have this conversation. I've worked on the internet for more than 20 years at this point, and this is a topic that no one really wants to talk about because it's very uncomfortable. We don't want to think about the people at the center of it who are being exploited. We don't want to think about it existing on our platforms, right? But while it's an incredibly uncomfortable topic, it's just imperative that we address it and we look at it as what we can do to sort of slow and stop these things and understand that it's a sensitive topic, but it's not worth ignoring. So thank you for joining me. Why don't you tell me a little bit about ICMEC and what you do there and your sort of approach.
Well, thank you so much, and it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Melissa and Erin. Again, it's a pleasure to be here. So if we look at the global child sexual exploitation, before I talk about the International Center, why do we exist? Just because the numbers of child sexual exploitation are staggering. If we look at technology, trends, new devices, the numbers of child sexual exploitation cases are tremendously increasing. Just last year, the U.S. National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, reported to the National Cyber Tip Line 36 million reports of online child sexual exploitation, and that is globally. If we look at those numbers, just think for a minute, 36 million, about 98% of those reports are abroad, not even in the United States. How do we build that capacity globally? And this is why the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children exists. We work with countries to not only provide law enforcement trainings for prosecutors, judges, but really get all the all the key stakeholders together, academia, industries, NGOs, researchers, and really governments together to bring them to the table to really create awareness, but also create a national plan of action for a country so they can address collectively online child sexual exploitation. Believe it or not, many of the countries out there, they lack legislation, they lack infrastructure, and they're 20 years behind of what we're doing in the United States and some of the European and Five Eyes countries. So this is why the International Center exists, to really advocate for child protection, but really develop capacity, national capacity building in a lot of the countries where many of the cases, where many of the offenders, and where many of these groups, criminal organizations reside. We need to work with those countries so they can tackle the problem from their side as well.
Thank you. I also want to talk a little bit about the terminology we're going to use today, just because some of our folks watching might not be familiar with it. So CSAM stands for Child Sexual Abuse Materials, and that has replaced child pornography as the term, because pornography, I assume, implies consent, and children can't consent. So this is exploitation material. Is that correct? Am I correct in understanding that terminology?
So, Erin, I think you are correct, and that is an issue of if we look at the pattern when child pornography, quote unquote, has been since the Roman times, since a long time ago. The way media, the way we all describe, the way society refers to it, child pornography, kiddie porn, Lolita. Pornography, it is not pornography. These are the worst crimes against humanity that you can imagine. This is child sexual exploitation, online child sexual abuse material, and these are crimes against the most vulnerable people in our society, and that is all children. And if you look at other terminology, there's the Luxembourg International Child Sexual Exploitation Guidelines. We all got together, NGOs and several countries together, to really define what it is. It is not child pornography, it is child sexual exploitation material, and that's how we ever have to refer to as it. Unfortunately, our law here in the United States needs a bit of improvement because still refers to it as child pornography. There's a lot of countries out there that are revising their legislation to refer to it as child sexual exploitation. If you look at, for instance, sex tourism, you think about, yes, people traveling to other countries. Well, it is not sex tourism. It is child sexual exploitation in the context of tourism. So those are the little intricacies that we have to understand, and the issue of terminology is really important. You can download a free copy of the Luxembourg Terminology Guidelines online.
Thank you very much. And hopefully we can add a link to those in the description to this. Now I think about, the bigger picture of e-commerce and online businesses. It's very important to have some sort of risk or trust and safety role, and every good company, I think, does. But we are looking at things often in the very micro, right? We are looking at financial transactions on our platforms because we don't want promo abuse. We don't want to see credit card fraud. We want to make sure our listings are compliant. But if you kind of take a step back, right? If you don't stand right in the front, but you take a step back and you look at why are people committing these crimes, it's often these financial crimes online, this fraud, it's often to move money around, to launder money, to otherwise obscure what they're doing. So it's not an intellectual jump, really, to say that this sort of fraud very often contributes to CSAM and exploitation of children, and it's occurring on all of our platforms. So my question to you is, what role do you see sort of e-com, marketplace, other sort of online platforms, what role do they play in the creation and the delivery of these sorts of materials? So we can think about where it is that we need to step in.
All right, that's a really good question, Erin. And let me go down to memory lane for a little bit. When, in the 80s, what we started seeing in the 80s is that child sex offenders, individuals interested in prepubescent children or child sexual abuse materials, what they would do is they would trade images. They would print them out and put the Polaroids on and send them across the United States Postal Service. They would go to coffee places and exchange different pins. Those were kind of like the signs, right? If they would wear a heart with another little heart in the middle, that meant they were in the sort of the same group. Now, once society in the US, law enforcement started tackling that problem in the mid 80s, even into the mid 90s, we were really working proactively to identify who was trading images, who was trading, sending the Betamax videos, etc. The US Postal Service really took a proactive approach in combating this type of crime. This is, again, before the internet, mid 90s, late 90s. Then with a society, we thought, oh, we defeated child sexual exploitation. But then the internet came, and that eventually, with technology, platforms, e-commerce, different payment methods, now cryptocurrency, and all these things that are rising, it's almost impossible to combat this type of crime. I was talking to a bank in Australia not too long ago, and they were telling me, Gigi, how do we, as a bank, as a financial institution, supposed to pull that transaction, that 29.99 transaction, when we have over 2 billion transactions a day? So banks started getting together, and in the United States, the U.S. Financial Coalition Against Child Sexual Exploitation was created. And that was created with one of the finance committees in Congress, because how could it be that someone using their credit card or their payment methods be able to have access to illegal material like child sexual exploitation, where the website can reside somewhere in Eastern Europe, for instance, and have over 30,000 individuals paying that $30, $29.99 a month? It has to be some sort of regulations and oversight on that. So the U.S. Financial Coalition Against Child Sexual Exploitation was created in the United States. I believe there's one near, there's European Financial Coalition, and there's the Latin America Financial Coalition. What can the banks do? Well, really look at a policy, and we need to have regulations. That's number one. Policy and regulation is very, very important. If you look at the ecosystem, there's NGOs, there's law enforcement, tech industry, financial, medical. It's a crowded space, and it's really about developing priorities. At the end of the day, it's priorities, getting those trust and safety teams really proactively trying to detect the indicators of child sexual abuse, the trends of child sexual abuse. And if they find something, start collecting data, because data drives decision, and decisions drive policy. And that's really important to be, even in the financial industry, even in the tech industry. If you look at back in the mid 2000s, I mean, the tech industry wasn't really forthcoming or really engaged. They had to be regulated. In the United States, just to give you an example, if there's a legal image on one of the platforms, they have to report it by law to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. In turn, they get a receipt. They've done what they had to do. I'm sure that financial industry don't want to be regulated, that they have to be reporting everything. But at least if they can do proactive work, again, regulations, policy, proactive detection, and also awareness. Awareness is key component. We have to educate all of the banks, all of the other financial industry, that there's a problem and there's an issue. What are the companies going to do proactively to combat this type of crime? One last point on that. We started seeing a lot of this sort of traffic in Eastern Europe, in the Philippines, in Southeast Asia, where there's little regulation, there's little or no legislation.
Yeah.
And I'll get to legislation later on, but we can't just rely on those governments or those countries to proactively detect this type of crime. As a company, it's the right thing to do, it's the ethical thing to do, and it's the moral thing to do, to proactively work with all the stakeholders to combat child sexual exploitation.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think this is our role within the social contract. It is our job to not give away necessarily all of our internal secrets for our individual companies, but we need to also talk to each other about these things. I love that banks were able to come together. I would hope that e-commerce and marketplaces could do similar. That's my wish. And I have my own opinion on this next question, and I would love to pepper it with yours. But what do you feel like? Is it hard to approach private business about these sorts of trends? Are we defensive? What are we most defensive about? Because it seems to me that we are in a prime position to start noticing patterns, to talk to you. This seems off to me. Can you tell me if this lines up with some of the behaviors that you've seen? And then for us to also talk to our I hesitate to say competition colleagues, and put these signals together, right? Like it seems like we should be able to do that. So talk to me a little bit about approaching private industry, where your challenges have been, how can we be better, and how can we learn to be a little bit less defensive in these areas where you need information from us?
Okay, Erin, I think, I wouldn't imagine, I would not think it's been as defensive. I understand that you have your clients to protect, there's privacy issues and,
Yeah.
and so on. But I think when it comes to the industry, it's like a roller coaster, right? A couple of years, it could be great. We have great engagements with the industry. Couple of years, the world is coming to an end, and all of a sudden we have no support from the industry. I always say we as an NGO, we cannot do our work without the ongoing support from the industry. And when I say industry, e-commerce, marketplace, financial, tech, you name it. I think the priority would be here to really have a further discussions as to what and how we can collectively work together to identify the trends. I would say not even identify the trends, really do sort of a gap assessment to
Yes.
identify
Yes.
exactly, to identify what are some of the areas. Maybe the industry has certain limitations. They can say, gee, we can work with you guys here, but not here or down the line. And this is why we have to collectively, let's get together. They're interested in working and just to identify those gaps. And then a lot of times it's just focusing on the lowest hanging fruit, which is prevention, awareness, and education. Somewhere in the middle, policy reform, proactive work, but also training the content moderators. That's really crucial. They might bump into stuff that no one would ever want to see. So
Yes.
it's really important they have that sort of mandatory evaluations and so on. That's on the proactive work. But I think it's a crowded space with so many organizations engaged, but I think there's so much more to be done. This is not a competition. It's the right thing to do to end or combat child sexual exploitation.
Yeah, I completely agree. I recently read a piece and they discussed it as basically harm reduction, right? To your point, if we can get the sort of low hanging fruit, the things that are easy for us to find, report, or shut down, that has a cascading effect. It allows us then to move our priorities to maybe some of the bigger issues that we need to tackle fraud wise and, money moving around, and kind of capture that as well. Thank you very much. What sort of can we do to directly impact your work? What are there specific things that you need from us? I imagine that's probably changing all of the time, short term, long term. What's your sort of perfect world collaboration with business and private industry? I would love to see something like the banks did, maybe for e-com and marketplaces. I think that would be awesome. But let me know what would make your life easier.
If I had a wish list there, and how great would it be to have sort of a virtual roundtable to, industry and some of the key players really to, first of all, create a level of awareness and a level of education. Talk a little bit more, roll over sleeves and talk about statistic numbers, more of our challenges that we're facing, and then try to identify where e-commerce marketplace where can they help? Could it be something that opening other doors in some other countries,
Yes.
engaging with some of the other partners as well? That to me that would be money. Honestly, that would be very, very helpful. I understand, especially right now with all this social economy, financial industry, a lot of the companies can't just write a check. I get that. But there's so many other things companies can actually do. and that is, getting more with even with the retailers, the merchants, and just again creating that level of awareness and education. Because one door may open another door in a specific country or a specific region, and that's how we can start driving action.
Yeah, and I think if we could all come together and come up with a consistent sort of best practices and standards for our own internal policies, and those were, kind of the same across the board, or at least comparative across, from business to business, that would let us know exactly what we're seeing and allow us to give you the same things all of the time. As well as, like, you would know that we talk to our merchants in a specific way and we ask for specific things from them. You would understand what our, like, sort of listing compliance policies were on e-com sites. And if it's the same across the board, it's easier for us to catch, for sure, but also for us to deliver information to you that's very standardized as well, right? You know what you're looking at. You can cross-reference. I told you about guy A. Someone else also told you about guy A. He just looks a little different over here on this other site. But it's easier to make that match, I would think, if there was, kind of a best practices there.
And
well.
another thinking out loud, and one of the things that I think we did actually with the banks, it was one of those issues that a lot of times the banks, they have to work with the government because they're taking a subpoena or taking some sort of request, right, from the investigating entity. When you put those industry and government and law enforcement, everyone's with their arms crossed, right? Because there's a sort of everything's pointing fingers. We are
Yes.
a lot of times we are the sort of the brokers, right? The neutral brokers. All right, this is not about pinpointing fingers. It's about A needs B and B needs A. How do we collectively engage together? Because at the end of the day, we have to A and B have to collaborate together.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that it would be helpful, I think about my industry and the people that I talk to every day. To your point, it is always that it's a defensiveness because they feel like fingers are being pointed at them, right? But the reality is that this exists probably on every platform. So we need to stop taking it personally in a way, back to our original sort of conversation or kind of topic of conversation, and point it towards, this is a social good. We are gathering information in order to, reduce harm and otherwise stop, to the best of our ability, child exploitation, and just close avenues, right? Shut as many doors down as we can for these people and these organizations, to make it harder. I'm realistic that we might never I hope that we could end this in my lifetime, but I think that the more that we do to just reduce avenues and make it harder, kind of like what the Postal Service did in the 80s and then the internet ruined it, will be a social good, but it's also just good for our business. And I think that's the other thing too, is that it tends to be, like you said earlier too, prioritization, right? Zero-sum game, and it's really not. We can do all of these things for social good and a platform that's safe. More merchants are going to want to sell on it, more people are going to want to buy from it, or whatever your business model is. So thank you very much. I completely agree with you, and I feel like my wheels are turning. So thank you.
No, and like I said, we were facing the issue with governments. We came as an NGO and law enforcement back in the 90s. We're going to wrest our way out of this. You guys stay in your lane, we stay in our lane. Although we're still in our lane, it's about just bringing collectively everyone together, because, they know that there's a lot of activities that just law enforcement can't do. And they need to bring all these stakeholders together. Because again, I always say, I think that collective approach is a much, much better way to tackle holistically.
Yeah, you suddenly have hundreds of thousands more eyes on it than you would have if you were just law enforcement, or even just, your work. We would have all of our trust and safety and our risk and payments folks would all be looking for these things. So I know that I want to shift a little bit and kind of talk about content moderation and payments side, because I'm thinking about that now that you mentioned it. I know that there is like sort of standard trainings for folks who go into content moderation and or who work in sort of like payments risk, right? To look for things that we know are triggers. Do you have specific trainings that we can take to our teams? Is that something that would be fun to like, maybe fun's not the right word, build together so that we can kind of use your knowledge internally, even if we might have to work on putting together sort of best practices in the industry. I would love to make sure that everyone on my teams going forward is aware of this. And so they're not just looking for the person who is committing gift card fraud. They're also understanding that that person that's committing gift card fraud may be money laundering and may be part of a larger organization. So it gives them purpose too. So do you have those now? Is that something that would be advantageous to develop?
That's actually a really good, it would be a good, when you said a minute ago, how can we identify areas of work? Absolutely. This would be something. I recall right before COVID, and Melissa is on the call, we were going to do a training. We were going to go, I believe, to Oregon to do a moderator training. But of course, COVID hit and then we all froze. But we do have, it would be a matter of, let's sit together, what did we create back then? It's probably much better now and robust. We haven't done much of those content training just because, it hasn't been, hasn't really been discussed. But having said this, I think there would be a really good training just to get all the content moderators, analyst folks really identify the indicators training. We call it, indicator and the specific patterns and where to report, just everything.
Yeah, no, that would be fantastic. So anybody who is watching this later on, if you want to join me in industry folks, we can work with Gigi to kind of pull this together. I would love to see that happen. Are there other things that you feel like we could be doing? Is there a level of I guess what I'm trying to ask, the folks that move in this space, that are creating and distributing this material, do they worry about being high profile? Can we make it very hard for them in a profile way? If we tell them we think that this is what they're doing in all of our policies that we do in business, will that scare them from continuing? Or is it better to just report to you through the avenues that we have? I know certain forms of fraud are acts of convenience. So if people come up against a barrier, or they come up against some friction in the process, they will stop. They won't move forward. I'm wondering if you've seen similar things in this area, and if there are ways we can try to stop people before they even get started, basically.
Okay, no, that's a good question. And look, if we look at the deterrent programs and projects that some of these companies are using, for instance, I'll give an example. There's in some of the countries, even in the peer-to-peer, the file sharing networks, eDonkey, all those networks. If you think about those platforms, there are millions of images being circulated in those platforms. Why? Because most of them are just exchanging material, just one person to another person. It's harder to detect. Some of these, for instance, ISPs are really developing sort of campaigns that when they know that they're downloading a known image of child sexual abuse, for instance, the user, the person that's downloading, gets a message warning: you're downloading illegal material, etc., etc. You can stop now, or we're gonna have to report it to the local sort of entity. It's an area that seems to be working, but then again, if you look at the other end, for instance, there are a lot of companies out there. There's a lot of ESPs out there. Once they get law enforcement requests basic subscriber information, or basic request IP address, any type of legal request that law enforcement request, in their privacy, in their policies of privacy, they have to notify the user. So to me, it's like, well, they're coming, right? So I think it would be interesting to define what that looks like. On one end, if you look at the Deterrence program, okay, stop, don't do it again, slap on the wrist. But on the other end, they're coming, be careful. This is what law enforcement requested. And to tell you, Erin, the individuals that we are sort of dealing with, the child sex offenders, they're not going to stop. The reality is that there's been a lot of studies out there, a lot of studies conducted. I think this one in particular, the Butner study. And one of the findings was that out of all the incarcerated child sex offenders, 40% were dual repeated sex offenders. So to me is, I get that. I mean, I think in some areas the deterrent program does work, but on the other end, it's like, you have to really thread the water there.
Yeah, so we're dealing with essentially a profile that's different than just straight financial fraud or like credit card fraud. Like these are people who are going to continue regardless of friction that you throw in front of them. And that's interesting about data privacy laws, because we think about those as being for good, right? Like those data privacy laws are there to sort of protect me from someone selling my information or otherwise giving it away. But what you've inadvertently created is like you're alerting the offenders that they're being investigated, and that allows them to move, to change tactics, and to otherwise, obscure who they are further. So I hadn't thought about that as a double-edged sword of our data privacy laws.
Right.
Thank you so much for talking to me today. Is there anything else you want to talk about your work, or any other questions you have for me? My wheels are turning. I want to get off this phone call and write some policy proposals for wherever I end up working next. And I really would love to work with you on coming up with some sort of standards practices for training, so we can build all of these eyes who know what they're looking for while we're online. But yeah, I'm gonna let you talk.
I think it's, if you, again, if you look at where we were 25 years ago to where we are now.
Yes.
We look at legislation. Back in 2000s, we created a model legislation report globally. We looked at 197 countries, and we looked at whether there was definition, criminalization, possession, mandatory reporting, distribution, 5 key areas of key legislation back in the mid-2000s. Out of 197 countries, only 5 countries met the 4 criteria. Moving along now to 2024, a lot of countries have changed their legislation. However, there's much more work to be done on the policy, national legislation, and so on. I think that's taking its course, and it's really up to the country to really look at that. I think from the company perspective, the industry perspective, I feel that there's a huge gap because, again, every year varies. Policy changes, leadership changes, priorities changes. And I think sometimes that's great, but a lot of times that you may have an ongoing project where there's training, where there's capacity build, et cetera, and that changes from day to day, from day to night. So I think having standard sort of projects, policies, I think that's really good, because if leadership changes, then we have an ongoing project as well. Most of our work, like I said, we really depend on to the support, the engagement with the industry. And I think if there's a company out there, if there's industry out there that are willing to get more engaged, absolutely. We can start with baby steps. We can start by raising awareness, building that sort of corporate social responsibility. We can develop trainings together to train the content moderators. If they have priority countries, we can engage with those different governments. It's a two-way street, right? It's not always, I'm not saying that, oh, what can you do for us? But what can we also do for the companies out there? Again, we are the NGOs. We have engagement with governments at several levels. It's great to show when a company is going with an NGO for a great cause, and that is to address online child sexual exploitation. Lastly, back when we started, as I said, from the U.S. Postal Service to technology, back in 2001, we had a huge roundtable, tech industry, financial. We brought in all these companies. And there was one company that stood up and raised their hand, and they said, what can we do to help? And today I give kudos to Microsoft at the time, because Microsoft realized that the internet was here to stay. Technology was going to improve. And at the time, Microsoft said, we'll do trainings, we'll do global trainings, and we want to engage with you guys. Eventually, a lot of the companies caught on, but it was one of those things kind of like with the deer in the headlights, and we open, we open the fire hose, and a lot of companies realize that, wow, this is an issue. No one wants to talk about it. But when you start showing the victims, showing the offenders, and how they're using their technologies to get to children, that's when it really opened their eyes.
Yeah, yeah. It seems to me that that it might be time to do something like that again. I think about how you said, every time, not just within your companies when your leadership changes, but every time there's a change in leadership in any country, that's going to change what the policy and what sort of the preferred programs are, right? So if we can get this standardized in some way, however that is, then that stays, no matter who it is kind of running things. And it reminds me a lot of what a lot of industry has done with regards to climate change and environmental work, right? We kind of had to peel it back. We had to all get together to talk about these things, to think about how we were going to address them. You can get now, a lot of e-commerce can get various certifications to prove that they're doing things, or, they're engaging with merchants who are environmentally savvy, or thinking about climate change, those sorts of things. I would love to see something similar here, right? We're not a safe space for those folks who are trying to harm. We are coming together as an industry. It would make me feel very good in my work if that could happen. So thank you so much, Gigi, Guillermo, for joining us today. I am just so happy to talk to you about this topic. I know it's a uncomfortable and not a smiley topic, but I really feel good about the things we could potentially do here.
No, thank you, Erin. And one last thought, and I just want to put it,
Please.
in this space, I'm sure, with the individuals that are looking at content, and we look at some of the material, there are days that can be difficult, they can be strenuous, but those are the days that really you have to bring it out. Why am I doing here? Because sometimes we have to take a stop, and you have to realize that anytime that a child is saved, or a policy is changed, or a new project is implemented, or a child has been ID'd in somewhere around the world, that is the day that you realize that your little impact that you're doing is actually making a change. And that is the driving force.
Yeah, I agree. Anybody that we can save is that one person is enough.
What an awesome, awesome closing sentiment. Fantastic discussion. I have some takeaways. I'm going to make sure that we post the Luxembourg terminology for everyone to download. I think it's really great to normalize the terminology that we use, and it's a fabulous, fabulous piece of academia. I'm also really excited to get an industry thought leadership consortium together, Erin. So anyone who does watch this, I think it's pretty easy to find us. I'm going to make sure that Gigi's contact information, Erin's contact information is embedded, so you can reach out to us if you're interested. Us working as a collective will save more humans, and the more humans that get saved, we can then take a victory lap and feel better about the work that we do. To both of you, thank you for your efforts. Thank you for the monumental task. Gigi, thank you for 350,000 and counting people that are in the fight, fighting on our side to get rid of this content and slow it down. Thank you both very much. Thank you everyone for attending.